I had a comment about that too, because I actually think that's true. So there's a psychological trait, openness, and openness fractionates into two types. One type of mind is associated with deep interest in ideas. People like that tend to prefer nonfiction. A variant of that is openness proper, and it's associated with a much deeper orientation towards the fictional and metaphorical. I do think we have different kinds of minds, but if we accept the presumption that there is a unity of knowledge, and I don't know if that's a presumption that you entertain or presume or share, because we could discuss the alternative.
A unity of knowledge, a form of truth.
My sense is that those two pathways have to unify. Now, I don't think we know how to unify them in the West. That's why there is this conflict between the science.
I agree with Jordan Peterson there, because in the East, there's the mystical and the mundane interact with each other actively, even in secular contexts, even in scientific and medical contexts. So I do think that that's a problem of the Enlightenment and Protestantism here in the West.
In the religious. It's not like I know how to rectify that. The best I can say is this is what I've learned from studying those stories. But I would also say, because I've studied your work, I do believe that idea that you formulated of meme is exactly the same thing that Mircea Eliade is detailing out in his work. And I think the reason that he's not attended to by the universities, because he's passé in the history of religious ideas, is because everything he says demolishes the postmodern Marxists. Demolishes them, which is something that seriously needs to be done. And so I keep hoping, I think, God.
Let's all take a moment and reflect on the mustache. I'm not sure if he's trying to look like Henry Cavill. I'm not sure if he's trying to look like Tom Selleck. I don't know what's going on here. Maybe he needs counseling. Maybe he needs help. But let's all take a look at Alex O'Connor's mustache. Okay, and now we're going to move on.
God, it would be such a remarkable thing for Dr. Dawkins to know, especially Eliade's work. Although,
dude, I didn't notice this the first time I watched this. They captured real life dinosaurs and put them in the back and froze them. That's cool.
Eric Neumann would be a close second, because it takes the notion of meme, which is what was the recreation of the world in imaginal space, and the transmission of those recreations and their potential battles. That's what you specified. And it expands it out into something that extends across millennia. It's the logical extension of your idea. And it's not like people know this, because there aren't people who know both literatures.
So this idea of lion as gene, dragon as meme, I think in so many words that
look at him struggle to make sense out of all of that.
It sounds like that's sort of a summary of what you're getting.
By the way, right here, they're playing nice and they're kind of interested in what each other are saying, Dawkins and Jordan. I mean, for the majority of this video, I'm going to say maybe up to here, when Jordan goes on this really long diatribe about the bronze serpent and the symbolism as it relates to Christ. For most of this, Richard looks bored, uncomfortable, and frustrated. Like he's like, just answer the freaking question. Just answer directly. Did the virgin birth happen? Was she a virgin when she gave birth? And Jordan Peterson will not answer. It's so frustratingly crazy. So I believe in the virgin birth, by the way. I'm a Catholic, so yeah.
And
I don't have any problem admitting that.
Richard, that you might agree with the idea that the dragon is an effective mimetic.
Remember, Catholics are both and, not either or. So we believe that it's both literally true and metaphorically true. So that's just kind of a basic rule of thumb when it comes to Catholics.
Action of the concept of individual predators, but it's just not that impressive. Yes, it's just not that.
Well,
it's true, but it's not an impressive truth.
Impressive at the same time that you are compelled and interested by the idea of meme. I mean, let me ask you a psychological question, if you don't mind. You're obviously welcome not to answer it, but there's a reason that the idea...
Yeah, because you just refused to answer like 2 or 3 of his questions.
...of meme gripped you, and there's a reason it spread. It's because you put your finger on something. So can I ask you how that idea emerged and why it attracted you?
As a Darwinian, I'm interested in the process of natural selection. Natural selection is the differential survival of replicating entities.
So he's about to get into this, but I view inspiration as the Holy Spirit, God, guiding, if you will, being. So I view the Bible as inspired, not as in every single text that claims to be about God or by God is of God, but that in the evolution of the text, in the changes, the transmission, the adjustments, the audience, the ability to understand, the ability to comprehend, what comes in, what goes out, the compression of different narratives, the existence of different narratives, and the way that different texts influence each other. So I think evolution is I believe in evolution, but I think evolution works not just in biology, but it also works in narrative and fiction and popularity. So I think the text itself is evolving and has evolved. So you need different accountings of creation accounts, for the Bible to be able to contradict and be a polemic against those accounts. And that in turn leads us to science as we understand it today, and an understanding of creation as we understand it today. And it will continue to evolve. Different literatures, different texts win out. So you have, they're calling it mimetic and calling it a meme effect and all these other high concept terms that I'm not trying to get into. And I don't even like calling them high concept because there's also like, what Chan terms. So I'm not trying to play in that ballpark. What I'm saying is that evolutionarily speaking, these stories are competing against each other, and the most true wins out. So yes, you have the Quran. Yes, you have the Book of Mormon. Yes, you have the Atrahasis. Yes, you have the Epic of Gilgamesh. Yes, you have, I don't know if there is actually a collection or telling or surviving narrative of the Great Deluge, but you have the Iliad and the Odyssey, and you have these stories competing for people's minds, for people's reasonings, for people's ethics and morals. And the different cultures have to play out. So it isn't simply about conquest. It's also about if you can live out these principles and have them help your life or hurt your life. And so the narratives have to catch on into your mind and have to be progenerated. And yeah, you can have stories that are outgrowths of these conflicts, of these paradoxes that don't go anywhere. So you have evolutionary development of narrative that is not harmful, but not helpful. So that just kind of vestigially sticks around. But you have other parts of the narrative that are extremely important to survival. And that becomes the story that everybody tells, because that's the story we need to survive. And that's the story that this document, that this narrative, that this oral tradition needs to propagate itself. So that becomes the dominant narrative, the dominant myth, the dominant story, the dominant legend, the dominant whatever. And the other ones die off because they can't propagate. Yeah, they might have been popular for a while. Yeah, the dinosaurs may have ruled for a long time, but they died out. And a new narrative has to come in to fill the gap. So, yeah, for a while there, the Mesopotamian myths were super powerful. For a while there, the Aztec and Mayan and Cherokee myths were really powerful. But then the Christian myth comes in and destroys all these narratives, not just because of weapons and conquest and disease, but because the super narrative that's, again, super condensed in the Bible, in the Gospels, is greater than the narrative being extolled by the indigenous people that are being influenced by this. And I don't just mean the indigenous people of the Americas or the Aboriginals of Australia. I mean the indigenous people of Dacia, the indigenous people of Latium, the indigenous people of Gaul, the indigenous people of Britain, the indigenous people of Norse, the indigenous people of Russia. The Christian narrative is so strong and so evolutionarily fit that it wipes out the other narratives. It suppresses and destroys the other narratives, regardless of conquest. So I think that's incredibly important, how the different manuscripts themselves and the different traditions within Israel would have been fighting with each other to become the super narrative that becomes so powerful. I would call that inspiration. I would call that the guidance of the Holy Spirit. Jordan's going to go a little bit closer to that claim. Dawkins is going to deny that claim, but still use that definition of what it is, and he's going to find it extremely interesting. And this is what I've been arguing on my channel for, like I said, I've been on here for 11 years. I've been talking about religion for 6 years, 7 years. This is what I've been arguing for on this channel. And this is the first time I've seen someone of note, two people of note, make the claim and the argument that I've been making on this channel. So even if I'm never famous for it, even if I never get credit for it, I'm glad that these two people are expressing something that I have been frustratingly screaming about in the desert of only a few viewers per video for years.
DNA is a very excellent replicating entity, whose replication and selection has given rise to the whole of life on Earth. I wanted to make the point that DNA is not the only possible replicator you could imagine.
Right?
There probably is on other planets, a different kind of replicator, not DNA. And then I thought, maybe we don't have to go to other planets. Maybe there's another replicator staring us in the face, the virus of the mind, something that spreads not by DNA replication, but by imitation from mind to mind. So it could be
I don't like that he labels it a virus, but that's fine. That's his understanding of it, and I'm not gonna try to argue semantics right now. I just like the fact that they're talking about a thing that I've been promoting, and these are legitimate scholars. They're not like me, who's just doing my thing based on inference and intuition.
A fashion in clothes, it could be a musical style, it could be an accent.
And I've had arguments with B.S. Lewis on this. I've had arguments with Gar on this. I've had arguments with, what was it? Godless Cranium did a takedown video of me for me saying exactly what these two luminaries are going to say, are already saying right now.
Accent, it could be a children's game. All these things are replicators which spread by a non-genetic means and might therefore potentially be the basis for a form of Darwinian selection.
Yep.
Darwinian selection would be popularity, the spreadability of an idea.
The longevity of an idea?
Yes, longevity of an idea, the spreadability, the fidelity of the idea.
How about the grip of motivation by the idea? Like, would you expect?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes,
okay.
that's a possibility. And I would even concede that an archetype might be one way in which certain memes might spread more than others. It might be compatible with a Jungian archetype. So that's my answer.
And this is, again, when you go back to my videos, my series, I think it was a 7-part series on the soul. When I get to the Jungian archetypes, you'll see that I say the same thing.
To the question, it was coming at it as a Darwinian and wanting to make the point that DNA, probably having spent the whole rest of the book stressing the gene as the unit of selection, I want to make the point that it may not be the only one.
Okay. So that's what I understood from your work. So it is on that grounds that I saw the concordance between what you were doing and what Eliade was doing in his investigation into the spread of religious ideas. I like what you described is what I understood. Okay, so let me ask you another question about that. Okay, so could you imagine a scenario where a meme had sufficient functional adaptive significance so that the individuals who acted it out gained a reproductive edge?
Yes.
Okay, so then you could imagine a situation where there was...
Which is, again, an argument that I've debated. I debated it on Gar's channel. I debated it on other channels. I didn't have this language. I didn't have the language of meme. I didn't, but I've argued this point. So I'm very pleased at this, at this video coming out, at this argument happening. I understand we have to go an hour and 20 minutes to even get here, but this to me is amazing. This to me is everything I'm interested in with the Bible. This is why I say the Bible is true. This is what I mean by inspiration. This is what I'm talking about when I'm talking to people on my channel. This is why I enjoyed reading Maps of Meaning and why I hate reading 12 Rules for Life 2, the second book that just sucked, Beyond Order or Beyond Chaos, whatever that was. That book sucked. The 12 Rules for Life was amazing. Maps of Meaning was amazing. And Maps of Meaning, again, like I did in my review when I said that it was a good book, it's like it wasn't presenting anything that I already didn't know, but it was presenting it all together. And I was greatly appreciated for Jordan, but I thought that Jordan didn't go far enough. And he finally gets to the statement that I wanted him to get to in that book here in this video.
I think I've got this right. A Baldwin effect between the meme and the genome.
Yes.
Okay, so then could you imagine an effect where the heroic hunters of the past who decided to cease acting like prey animals, maybe when they got rocks or sticks, were acting under the impulse that facing down the predator was the appropriate strategy? Because I was thinking about this reproductively.
Well, so you're projecting the idea of the meta predator or super meta predator, because you need to be ready for all possible attacks, especially when you don't know what attack it's going to be. So you need to be able to fight the super predator. You need to be able to fight all aspects of it. So you can't just be ready for the flood. You have to be ready for the fire. You can't just be ready for the fire. You have to be ready for the ice. You have to be prepared for all conditions. So you have to create the super predator, the super enemy. You have to, as I said, with my narrative of how I think Exodus came about, you're not just talking about Egypt. You're not just talking about Babylon. You're not just talking about Hethia. You're talking about every superpower that you're up against, and you're compressing it, and you're compressing these important historical narratives that you think you need to survive into one story, and you're creating a meta-narrative within the text that then can be conflicted with new accounts, as new information rises, as new books come about. Now those books now we've lost the battle, so this meta-narrative for this super creature that we're fighting doesn't work anymore because society has changed. Now the weapons have changed. The material that we're using to build has changed. So now we have to have a new narrative, and that conflict between the two is going to come up with new super predators, new super survival techniques that we need to project into the future. And so then the next text comes around. And so you get through the Babylonian exile, you get through, that's why you need to include the deuterocanonical books in the biblical narrative for the biblical narrative to do what it's supposed to do, because you have to be able to counter the Hellenistic influence that comes in and sweeps over all of Mesopotamia. Okay, so how do we counter those kind of philosophical ideas and this kind of perversion? Okay, this is how we do it. We do it this way. Okay, so now that conflicts with the other versions of the story. And now through this narrative, we go again. Now Rome comes in and Rome conquers, and Rome's a completely different beast. So how do we handle Rome? Okay, we can't handle Rome with aggression. Aggression doesn't work. We lose. How do we handle it? We fight it with love, with a radical love, radical acceptance, radical forgiveness. That's how we conquer the empire. And that is indeed how the empire is conquered. Christianity eventually conquers and destroys the Roman Empire and submerges the empire. What's left of the emperor becomes the Pope. The office of Pontiff Maximus becomes the Pope. Like that is Christian. You need this meta narrative, and yes, it expresses itself in real life all the time.
Like, that women are hypergamous. They like men cross-culturally about 4 years older than they are. The most fundamental female pornographic fantasy involves vampires, werewolves, pirates, surgeons, and billionaires. Dominant men who are capable of standing up to predators, who can be brought into an individual relationship. Okay, so that's the fundamental reproductive story meme that seems to drive women. It's allied with the hero myth. They're the different variants of the same story, the different sexual variants of the same story. And it seems to me it's not unreasonable to note that that's the fundamental story of humanity. And so I don't understand why you're not impressed by that.
We started talking about the Baldwin effect, and suddenly we got into women, what women like. I mean,
well, the men who act out the heroic meme are much more likely to reproduce.
It's an example, but perhaps we need to explain what the Baldwin.
I was going to say that's probably helpful.
Yes, that would be useful.
Okay. It was suggested by Baldwin, I think in the late 19th century. It's a kind of genetic assimilation of a cultural or learned idea. So the idea is that certain animals learn things, learn a clever trick. It might be nut cracking by chimpanzees, for example, or potato washing by Japanese macaques, opening milk bottles by English tits. And it perhaps spread as mimetically as an epidemic of.
The way that he talks about the birds is, I don't know, the first time I watched through this just made me laugh.
Copying, and that's known to have happened with the blue tits and great tits in Britain. Now, certain individuals are likely to learn it faster.
And I also can't help but think about, what is it? I used to watch a show all the time, but he stopped making videos. Simplicity or something like that, where it was animated. It was fun. It was a comedy thing. Anyway.
Than others, and there may be genetic variation in the speed with which they learn it. And as the generations go by, natural selection would have favored speed of learning the new trick. And eventually they would have learned the new trick so fast they didn't need to learn it at all.
Right.
It becomes genetically assimilated into the genome. That's the Baldwin effect.
Okay, I would say that's essentially the same pattern of archetype evolution that's implicit in the Jungian theoretical
Well, that's
model.
very interesting, because that suggests that Jungian archetypes might be genetically assimilated via the Baldwin effect.
Yes,
and that's a fascinating idea.
Yes. Okay, so now
I know we're coming to the end of our time soon anyway. It's nice to end on a shared point of interest, which is the Baldwin effect and the archetype's potential origin.
And I want to be very clear. I did not have the language for the Baldwin effect. I've not heard that term before until watching this video. But again, this is what I've been arguing on this channel for years, and what I've been arguing in my personal life, even before I was a Christian, after I left the church, before I was a Christian again, before I returned to the church. In college, I was arguing this with people when we would get together to talk about, different religions and the Bible. When I was a personal trainer teaching martial arts, when I would get together with people who wanted to talk about what the Bible was or wasn't, this is the conversation that I would be having. So I'm glad that it's finally happening out in the public and someone's going to hear this and react to it.
And the Baldwin effect. Do you think that is something that is worth exploring further? Is that something that we can?
Because it speaks of the potential relationship between the spread of memes and the alteration of of the genetic process. I would say it probably happens fastest by sexual selection. So
Yes.
right. So imagine that a meme. Okay. So imagine a meme develops a representation, imaginal, and the people who embody it are more effective in dealing with predators. And then imagine that there's a concordance between that and the attractiveness of those males to women. Seems highly probable. Well, then you can see that because sexual selection is a pretty rapid mechanism, that Baldwin effect gets spinning.
I totally agree with that. I've even suggested, actually, a slightly way out suggestion, that the human habit of standing on our hind legs might have been sexually selected and then genetically assimilated via the Baldwin effect. Chimpanzees do sometimes walk on their hind legs. Now, if for mimetic reasons that was sexually attractive in our ancestors, so as an epidemic of sexual display, then natural selection could have favored those individuals who were best at standing on their hind legs, genetically speaking, and then it would become genetically assimilated. This sexually selected mimetic effect could have been genetically assimilated and given rise to the genetic tendency to...
And let me relate this to orthodoxy. So Dan McKellen and the other scholars are going to argue that orthodoxy isn't really a thing, that it's something that gets developed later. But I think orthodoxy is exactly the dominant form of Christianity that has to be developed based on selection. Let's go back to sexual selection. So women at a certain time, because women represent nature here, women at a certain time are going to want a man who's monogamous. We got classical theology. Want a man who's loyal. Classical theology. We want a man who's honest. Classical theology. Want a man who's strong, who can protect. Okay, so what does that mean? They want a man. So all these things that they're selecting for are going to be represented in ideals in Christianity, specifically classical Christianity, classical theology. And so that's the version of Christianity that wins out, because that's the version of Christianity that is promoting the ideas that are being selected for by mate selection, by cultural selection. So this is what's developing. The orthodoxy is orthodox because it's true. Why is Christianity true? Why is Catholicism the one true faith? Because it reflects reality on a meta, or in this case, a meme level. These are the ideals that women are selecting for. So therefore, they're the ideals that will be propagated in society, which is based on the confliction and paradoxes that arise and the new conclusions that must be drawn out of the narrative, which has now become a meta-narrative, which is super condensed of different narratives and beats out and destroys what we would call false narratives or false religions that cannot compete, that cannot help you survive once they've come into conflict with Christianity. Orthodoxy always wins.
And walk on our hind legs.
So I remember what I was going to ask you about this. So imagine you have a situation in the biblical narratives where the idea of sacrifice is dramatized and ritualized. So it's acted out. It's not exactly understood. It's dramatized and acted out. Well, I believe there's a concordance between the probability that sacrifice would be offered and the ability of someone to forego gratification or to work towards a future end. They're the same thing. And the ability to forego gratification, which is associated with a cortical development, is a great predictor of future success. Let's say future, because we know, for example, that trait conscientiousness, which is something like the ability to delay gratification, is the best predictor that isn't cognitive of long-term future success. The ability to sacrifice the present for the future is a hallmark of a strategy of adaptation that's going to propagate down the generations.
That's interesting. As a Canadian, you probably know about the potlatch phenomenon.
Yes.
Where
never heard of this before. Never heard of the potlatch.
So a great sacrifice is a social display. Destruction of one's own property which is a form of sacrifice. Destruction of one's own property is a mark of prestige.
Right. Well, it indicates those communities. It indicates two things: your willingness to distribute generously to the community, because you're a big man if you can do that, but also your faith in the process by which that wealth was generated.
So I've given up everything I've owned 3 times in my life. I'm right now in the 3rd time or 4th time in my life that I've done this, and everything always comes back. Every time I've given up all my possessions, all my money, whatever status I've had, every time I've thrown it away, it's come back. And when it comes back, I'm always doing a little bit better. Now, the money is not as easy to come back every time. Every time it's a little bit harder to get the money back, I will admit. But other aspects of my life do improve. And this can be seen as vows of chastity, vows of poverty, or giving away your wealth. And your faith in God or your faith in the system or your faith in your abilities, however you want to word it, I would call it faith in God, that he's going to take care of you, that he's going to provide, is that, okay, so all this is going to come back. I will make the sacrifice now, but in return, all this will come back. This is not prosperity gospel. This is not like wishful thinking. This is, I have faith that I will survive and that God is with me and I'm going to follow God's principles. And if I live out these principles, these things will happen and they will happen again and again and again. As long as I live out these principles, this is what happens. This is the mathematical consequence of doing these actions.
I'm so good at, see, I think
That's
women
what I call truth when it comes to the Bible.
use wealth as a marker of sexual attractiveness, not because they're interested in wealth, but because wealth is the best single predictor of the ability to generate wealth. And the potlatch is that kind of manifestation. It's like, yes, I have all this stuff. I can give it away and burn it and I can make it again, because it isn't the wealth, it's the capacity to generate the wealth, right? It's a process or a spirit, you could say, if you wanted to get metaphorical about it.
And hearing that made me reevaluate the way that I view who my father was when I was growing up, because my father turned $100 a month of my mother's, I don't know what to call it, Social Security check that I would get as support for me into a massive house, into investments, into money for the family, his family. So he did amazing. So my dad had very great ability. So when I would wonder why, maybe this sounds a little cruel, when I wonder why women would find him attractive or anyone would anyone really likes him so much, well, it's because of his potential to earn, his potential to produce, his talents and his abilities made him attractive as a person, made you want to be his friend, made you love him because of what he could produce, because of what he can do. And I never thought of my father in that way. So that's a very interesting thought here, that maybe sexual selection is selecting for potentiality, not just simply status, but potential future status and resources.
So there's this remarkable concordance between
Not
your
just
work.
resources you currently have. So the easy argument, the red pill argument, is that they're arguing women are selecting for the resources you currently have. But based on my relationship on with my wife and what was just said and my reevaluating of my father's life that I did today, I would say that yes, it would make sense that women aren't simply hypergamous in the red pill sense of, oh, I want the guy with the most stuff now. They want the guy who's going to have the most stuff in the future, and not the most stuff, but the most stuff that is relevant to their lives, that will help make their lives better so that they don't die alone, so that way they don't starve, so that way their children have futures, so that way their children's children and great grandchildren can have great lives and prosper and survive. So it's the gene trying to survive, and the gene, the structure of the mind, the way it's evolved, is saying this religion is true because this religion will help me survive. This narrative is true because this narrative will help me survive.
And these works that I've been investigating, like I said, no one knows the two literatures. And so it's very frustrating in a sense, because I understood your concept of meme, I would say, in exactly the way that you just laid it out. And I thought, this is exactly what I've been studying. There's these fundamental narratives, and the people who embody them. Look, the heroes in the theater, they're actors of a narrative meme. They're obviously attractive. People flock to watch them. You know that if you take Vervets and you show them pictures of.
Okay, guys, well, let's let him finish his thought, and then we're going to go ahead and call it a night. We're not going to finish the whole video. We only watched a little section of it. I hope that tonight was fun. I hope everybody had a good time. Let's let him finish his thought. We'll stop it there. We'll do the outro, and then we'll do the outro music.
The other Vervets in their troops, they spontaneously gaze longer at the higher status Vervets. Right, it's exact. So imagine this. In the human societies, you have people who act out the appropriate meme, let's say, which is something like a meta strategy for dealing with predation. It's something like that.
And I think this still works with subcultures. So when I was goth, I wasn't perfectly goth, so I didn't fit in exactly right with that group. When I was different things, because I think your status is reflective with how much you match. I'm going to use the term that they're using, the meme. I think your status degrades the more you are outside of the meme. So if you're a football player, but you do a lot of artsy stuff, even if you're a great football player, you're not going to be high status. You have to act like a football player. If you're goth, but you do a lot of cutesy stuff or you do a lot of preppy stuff, you're not going to be high in the goth subculture in that hierarchy, because you're doing too many things that oppose the archetype of goth. So I think that's true.
You can approximate that to a greater or lesser degree. The more you approximate that, the higher you are on the sexual selection hierarchy. And I think that's clear. Like it's
Okay. He's going to keep talking, and I think we're good.